free. Don't have to wait till the end to hold on to a question. If you have a question in midst while I'm talking, please just raise your hand or put it in the chat so I can deal with it then. That helps me know what direction and what sort of information that you're kind of keen to hear. Otherwise, I might just speak for an hour and go off on a tangent that doesn't hit home to something that you're looking for. So I've been asked to talk about mindfulness and autism today. And that's my journey as someone on the autism spectrum. And what I will talk about is my journey with mindfulness as someone on the autism spectrum, and just talk about some experiences basically, and how that's helped me. And so actually, to begin our session, I'm actually going to guide you through just a really short little mindfulness practice. It's not compulsory, so if you don't feel like tuning into it, that's completely up to you. But obviously, we keep our our microphones off, so it doesn't disturb anyone else. But sometimes we don't know what mindfulness. Mindfulness is a big field of that's tucked into one word. And this, what I'm going to guide you through, is just a very tiny piece of it. But okay. So if you just want to close your eyes, I'm going to assume that all of us are just sitting either in a chair or on a sofa, maybe on the floor like I am, and that's fine. Wherever you are is perfectly fine. In these practices, you don't need to be sitting with your legs crossed up around your head like a yogi guru. So just bringing your attention down into your feet touching the ground. When I mean, say, by attention, taking your attention to the sensations in your feet, just noticing what sensations you have there. Maybe you have socks on or shoes on, or maybe you have bare feet that are touching the floor. Just become aware of this. Maybe you feel tingling or warmth or coolness, maybe even pressure where the feet are pressing against the floor. Just observing those sensations. You might find that your mind's really busy because we've just been chatting, and you've probably been chatting and doing things before coming on the call. Just recognize that your mind has got thoughts going on. Notice those thoughts. And then consciously and gently guide your attention back to those sensations in your feet. You notice the sensations against your back and your buttocks and your thighs, which make contact with where you're sitting. The sensations there, pressure, warmth, tingling. Maybe you're aware that you don't feel any sensation. That in itself is awareness. And each time you notice that your mind is busy, that's okay. It's what our minds do. Just notice that it's busy, and then consciously guide the attention back to those sensations in the body, the feet, the back, the buttocks. Even your hands may be resting on your lap, or your thighs. Just really tuning into the sensation of tingling, pressure. Maybe you experience some other discomforts in your body that are taking your attention. Just observing those sensations. Noticing the breath moving in and out of the body. Maybe the rise and the fall of the chest, the rise and the fall of the belly. Now, the next breath, just become aware of the body as a whole. As you inhale, filling the body with the breath from the head all the way down the neck, the shoulders, the torso, the legs, the feet. As you exhale, releasing, relaxing, allowing the body to relax as you exhale up and out. And just gently opening your eyes if your eyes are closed and coming back into this space. So that's a really short one of the guided practices or one of the tools that we call a practical practice in mindfulness. The reason why I decided to start a session this way is for two reasons. One, because we've all been busy before we've come onto the session. And so even though you may be quite tuned in and listening to me, you will find that your mind will still be attached to whatever it was that you're doing before you came onto the session, or thinking about what you need to do after the session. And that's kind of the crux of what our minds do. We're either thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future. And we very rarely stop and be in this present moment. And ultimately, the definition of mindfulness is paying particular attention in the present moment. And it's that particular attention. So that practice is a demonstration of particular attention. It's about drawing yourself into your body and being present in the body. The other reason why I went to do a practical kind of start is sometimes I'm asked about mindfulness and autism and how can people share mindfulness to autistic people that they're working with. And I always find this a really interesting question, because my question back to the people asking me was, how do you teach an autistic person to make an omelette if you've never made an omelette yourself? And sure, you might have the skills to go and get a recipe, read a recipe, understand the recipe, and make some resemblance of a omelette and have the autistic person participate that in some way. But when you're not really familiar with the omelette making process, you won't have the insight and the skills to know how to make adaptations to the process that can further incorporate the autistic person in the process. Does that make sense? I know that I've got only names and no faces, so I can't see any nodding. So I'm going to assume that you agree with me. So it's the same for mindfulness. I could sit and show you lots of guided practices, but actually until you're practicing them yourself, it's really difficult to know how to make an adaptation for someone that you're working with that works within their interest. And, you know, that's and I'm sure you're all aware of, it's a very strong element if you're working with an autistic person, is to work within their interest and adapt things that work with that interest. So if the interest happens to be making omelettes and you're trying to teach math, then actually using a topic around omelettes and counting eggs is going to be a much more accessible way for the person to learn about counting than going and getting a stack of cards and counting with cards. And so the same goes for mindfulness practices. Some of the, so part of my primary role, my full-time role, is that I work for a learning disability organisation that also supports people with autism. And because I practice these on a daily basis, the mindfulness practices, both practical practices, and then there's philosophies or attitudinal qualities, which I'll get to those shortly. It enables me to watch and observe someone that's being supported by one of our teams and pick up on something that's really familiar and comfortable with them that they do, and then try and expand that into a mindfulness process. So, come on. So my dog's just decided he's woken up and realised that he's shut out of the room and sneezing. Come on. So for an example, there's a person that we support who the is quite a large gentleman, and there's only female staff that support this person, and it's lone working. And it's a very tight living area, whole house space. And when that person becomes quite upset, it can be quite challenging in a very physically challenging way, so that the staff members can be quite quickly trapped. And one of the things I noticed about this person when spending time with them is that he liked to blow raspberries on his fist. And I thought, that's brilliant, because when you blow a raspberry, you've got to inhale consciously and exhale consciously. And so what the team do, and what I've spent time with the team learning, was to make use of this thing that's already within his interest. And so they don't just wait until he's in crisis and do this, they do it all the time. So even just as a general form of engagement, banter, every moment-to-moment chatter, they'll muck around and have some blowing this raspberry. When we put conscious breathing processes into our body, we start to make changes to our nervous system. And, you know, in that practice that I've just led you through, I didn't take you through a breathing technique. But there's lots of practices that are around breathing techniques, and breathing techniques are about calming down the nervous system. So there's breathing techniques that you can use in the moment when you can really feel the anxiety at a heighten, to immediately try and reduce that heightened state of anxiety. And then what's most beneficial is when you incorporate in the day-to-day life breathing practice techniques, because you start to reduce the sensitivity of the nervous system. You know, we have very, very sensitive nervous systems, and you know, I think our birthright is that we have very sensitive nervous systems. And then the process of our life, they become even more sensitive. I would almost call it like it's quite similar to a post-traumatic stress state. So we have this kind of chronic state because the nervous system is triggered so often, that fight-flight is triggered so often, it makes it more and more sensitive. And the ways to reverse that, there's lots of ways to reverse that. Breathing techniques on a regular basis, you know, start to have an impact, and a long-term impact on our nervous system. So does diet, so do meditation practices, so do attitudinal qualities, ways of thinking, because, you know, for every thought we have, a chemical follows that thought, and our nervous system is an electrochemical system. So our body does respond to our thoughts, which I guess brings me to the attitudinal qualities. And, you know, some of you might be familiar with this if you're familiar with any yoga and meditation practices there, you know, or Buddhism, there's more than Buddhism, but it's just gone from my mind. Taoism, you know, some of these ancient philosophical approaches to life. So non-judgment, now, and we hear that's quite a common thing, learning about non-judgment, but actually learning about non-judgment and implementing that into your day-to-day processes is a really powerful thing. And the extent of what being non-judgmental means. Possibly when I took you through that guided practice then, and I was asking you to explore the sensations in your body, there would have been some judgment that come up in your mind. Maybe, oh, that hurts. In that moment, you've made a judgment, you've made a label. So judgment isn't just always about, oh, that person's not a nice person. That is part of it. But judgment is actually about really learning to notice what labels we put on things, and that in that moment we put something in a box and we hold on to it. And sometimes those thoughts and those thinking aren't healthful. They're not helpful and they're not healthful. they can actually add to this very low-grade constant of triggering our stress response. And I'm sure you're all familiar and aware of that. Our stress response can be triggered in little ways, and it can be triggered in big ways. And what we generally happen on a day-to-day basis is have lots of low-level things triggering us, and they're so low level that we miss it until so much happens that it, boom, makes a big, and either our heart races or our belly feels funny, or our thoughts are racing, or we're sweating, or we're short of breath, or we have like cold and flu symptoms. So the process for me around mindfulness is about refining, becoming even more in tune to the very early warning signs of my stress response, and noticing what's triggered that and what things I can change. That would take me more than an hour to get through to describe. But so non-judgment is an attitude of quality. Patience. And patience is learning how to allow things to unfold when they're meant to unfold. So something that's quite difficult it's actually difficult for all humans, but it's amplified for autistic people. We express this in a more exaggerated way, and that's change. Having routines changed or something changed, and why it's exaggerated for us is, the way that we deal with it comes out as ways that might be socially unacceptable or very difficult or uncomfortable for other people to manage. Patience, and applying patience in things that are changing or things that have changed. A routine's changed, or a habit's changed, or a situation's changed. Learning for me to apply patience, and the way to apply patience is telling myself that this is okay, that this is happening this way for a reason that I will learn about in the future. And that might sound simple, and it wasn't always an easy process for me to take this process on. But mindfulness is about a way of life. It's not a pill that you take once a week or once a month or once a day for a month, and then all of a sudden everything changes. Mindfulness is about learning to change your life. And I guess I should say that, besides having a diagnosis of autism, I've also had diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, migraine epilepsy syndrome. I forget which kind of anxiety disorders have been attached to my list of diagnosis. I've had 2 full significant breakdowns, full complete breakdowns, which if I hadn't have had this holistic approach to my well-being, I would have no doubt ended up in some kind of an institution if I'd survived it. I think that's the word, if I inside it. But my journey with holistic health started at a very young age because of my multiple sclerosis diagnosis. And so, at the early in my early 20s, I was thrown into these alternative medicines and wasn't really sure what was going on, but I went with it because orthodox medicine didn't have anything to give me to help me. And at that stage, I didn't have my autism diagnosis either. That came afterwards. So my nervous system has been quite a mess, a real mess, and I've been bedridden for very extensive periods of my life. Orthodox medicine's prognosis was that by this stage of my life, I would be in a wheelchair. And I'm not in a wheelchair. I actually can cross my legs almost up over my shoulders, and that's from many years of yoga. But I didn't do yoga in order to get flexible or to be able to put my legs over my head. Yoga was part of this mindful lifestyle change. yeah, so that's how I've come into it. So mindfulness is just part of the process. There's been a lot of me learning about diet and nutrition and how that affects the nervous system and making changes. So looking at things nutritionally, understanding how what foods impact us. I am gluten-free. When I when I changed my diet to a gluten-free diet, that had quite an impact on some of my sensory experiences. Didn't make them go away. It made them more manageable, because when the body's not in a healthy state, the nervous system and the immune system's not in a really balanced, healthy state, that or then impacts even more on what the sensory experience you have. And you'll know this with yourself. If you have a cold or a flu or a migraine, that actually sound is unbearable, or people talking to you is unbearable, or even maybe watching or reading something is quite unbearable, because at that moment your bodies can't cope with that. So it's the same for me, from my perspective. It's the same for autistic people. We might have hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity, but it can be much more manageable by taking care of our inner health.
Zaffy, there's a question from somebody saying that they're autistic and they don't often feel emotions, and they've been told that they can't do mindfulness or CBT therapy, and they want your views on that. So
I first want to know, I want to know if you yourself believes that you don't feel emotion.
I think they're alexithermic, so that's how they feel, understanding emotions and
okay.
Yeah. I have to say, it's a very common thing that working with people, autistic adults, that people often say to me, I can't do mindfulness because of my brain doesn't turn off. So if that helps you to move forward.
But that, I mean, the point about mindfulness is about helping the brain turn off. And that practice that I started at the beginning, about coming into the body sensations. And I find it an interesting thing about emotions. How do we feel emotions? And then people put emotions and feelings together, and are they one and the same? Are they separate things? If I touch this table, that's a feeling, but then they talk about emotions being feelings. So there's a little bit of a crossover that I'm unsure about. And when we feel emotions, we actually feel sensations, or when people feel emotions, they often associate feelings in the body. So I'm not sure, but there's also that, for me, there's an intellectual process with that, or at least there's an intellectual process that people talk about. I'm sad because I feel this, this, and this. So my question to question back would be: is this person actually able to feel sensation in the body? So mindfulness is more about the sensation in the body rather than the emotion. And I know that, in particularly around lots of sensory issues and proprioception issues, that individuals need to put pressure on the body to feel pressure. And so that would be my suggestion when working with someone like that. If that's what's needed, if a weight needs to be on the body, they need to be wedged into a corner or into a chair, having something that enables them to feel a sensation in the body. Then that's the process that I would use when going through any of the practices, and then taking your attention to those sensations. There's probably an element there that probably connects with some self-harming elements, and enables someone to feel a sensation, and that sensation's then drawing you out of the busyness of your mind. So it's about looking for ways to do these things in a helpful way, rather than a more self-harming way. yeah, and I think for me, my process has been more about hypersensitivity, and so how to manage that. So you know, my partner had a steel coffee pot. This is an example of how I would use mindfulness practice. Had a plunge pot that was steel, not glass. So the canister was steel, and the plunger was steel. So of course, when they pushed down together, it was, to me, it was like a train's brakes screeching. It was horrendous, and I'd never seen a steel one before. And it was just, you know, the sensation on my body was just absolutely horrible. And my partner got to the point where she would warn me that someone was going to plunge it, you know, so I could leave the room. And this was great. This is really good proactive thinking. But what would happen was that it was actually building my anxiety, because there was this anxiety of because in my mind I'm thinking about this noise, and if it's going to happen, and then it's going to happen, I'm going to have to brace myself. So the thinking about it was actually creating the anxiety. And so the one day I stopped and I thought, I'm not being mindful about this. I thought, okay, the mindful process would be to stay with the sensation, even though as uncomfortable it is, because I'm attaching labels to it, I'm attaching judgment to it. I'm saying this is uncomfortable, I'm saying this is unbearable, I'm saying all these things. And while I'm doing this, I'm creating it as something that locks in my body. And, you know, we aren't permanent, we're energy. And energy is constantly moving and changing. What makes us permanent and solid is that we lock ourselves into a belief in a box. And I know that's a much more complex philosophical conversation. And mindfulness is about, in this moment, this is what you're experiencing just in this moment. It wasn't yesterday and it's not going to be tomorrow, it's just this moment, and it passes. So lots of those practices and meditation processes, when you're talking about, you know, your mind is busy, and visualize the thoughts being clouds that are moving past, because thoughts are transient. It's only if we keep thinking and we're going to hold them there. So going back to this steel canister or the steel coffee pot, I started actually doing it myself, and I wouldn't even put any liquid in it. I'd keep it dry, which is the worst of all. And I'd close my eyes and I would slowly push it, and I would experience the sensations that were brought into my body. And I started to do this every day, and doing it slowly over and over again to change my relationship to the sensation. It's not desensitizing, although I know that some principles or practices would call this desensitizing, and if you want to call it desensitizing, I kind of think that desensitizing is that actually I can plunge that and I don't even hear it. Whereas I still hear it, but my intellectual process and relationship to it has changed. It's just this moment. It's just this moment. Sometimes I get more of a visual rather than experiencing it as sensation in the body. I see it as a visual concept, the experience. But what I know is that my nervous system isn't reacting to it in the heightened way that it was. And I'm not having now the preemptive anxiety around it. And I've done this with quite a few things, traveling on trains, you know, the streets of the trains, the speed of the trains, the busyness of the trains, the pace of the trains. You know, I would put blue tack in my ears and headphones on my head. There's one station in Tamworth Station I found the most difficult, and I would actually go outside of the station and keep an eye on the clock and come in just before my train was due, because the trains would come through there while I was waiting at such a speed. It wasn't just the sound, it was the speed that was like really intense in my body. And the same thing, similar to the coffee pot, I realised one day was that what I'd be doing was actually bracing myself in this and already creating this anxiety. When you do that, you actually make the experience worse. And so one day I decided to stand there and not brace myself, and actually imagine myself as a blade of grass that would get blown with the train moving past. So I didn't create any resistance with the train, and it made it much more manageable. And my relationship again to that sensation changed, and I don't leave the platform anymore. So I think, that's probably not directly answered that question. And probably it would take for me a bit more of asking more questions about the individual and what goes on for them, what they do experience in their body, what they don't experience in their body, what they do experience in their mind, to be able to find a way to adapt mindfulness processes and mindfulness philosophy to help you incorporate that into your life, or at least make a start. And it may be that actually doing something more physical, if you struggle to actually feel sensation in your body, doing something more physical like yoga it doesn't have to be yoga. I'm just using that as an example because, you're putting pressure on your joints. And so you are going to experience things in your body. And yoga should be a mindfulness practice. It's not about getting flexible. It's a mindfulness practice, actually being with that sensation in your body, using the breath to move with what's going on in your body.
There's another question as well. The question is, they try and encourage their students to practice breathing, but they're very resistant. So do they just keep trying different ways? I think you kind of answered that at the beginning, didn't you, with the blowing bubbles?
It's really about finding something they already do. So for this gentleman who blows raspberries, because he has the capacity to learn breathing techniques, because I've sat there and we've done them, and he's gone, I don't want to do this, and I was like, okay. And so it was when I one day saw that he did this, because it was like, that's what we can use. And he doesn't even know he's doing a breathing technique. And that's why we get the staff team to do it when he's just ordinary, as soon as they come in on shift. I mean, I don't know if the staff team how regularly they do this. I can't, but this is what I taught them, and they were doing it, and it was working. So hopefully they're continuing on. So this spending, just as you walk in and say hello and spend a couple of minutes going like this, you're already getting him to consciously do a breathing technique. And then it works. When they start to see him escalating, they can amp it up a bit and go, I can blow a raspberry bigger than you and make a game out of it. And, they can just increase that game given the level of his heightened state. Other people have used just blowing bubbles, the soap bubbles through loopy things, little blowing bubbles. I know there's going to be a health and safety risk with this one. With one gentleman, I had a lighter, and I'd light it and I'd say, blow it out, and blow it out. And we just keep doing it over and over again because he liked lighters. So that worked for him. Having little floating things on water and blowing them around. So having a hot drink, and then before drinking the drink, going through a practice of we're gonna cool the drink down. Inhale and counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's exhale for the count of the 4. 4, 3, 2, 1. Wonderful. Let's do that again. Come on. And so ratios are important. A 4-4 count is important. A 4-8 count is important. Because our breathing is our bodies are a chemical system and gas exchange, so we're exchanging gases. So when we work with a ratio, we're having an impact of how that affects our body. I'm sure everybody knows that when you're in the state, if you've just gone for a run, this will happen, or if you're in a hyperventilating state, which when you've gone for a run, you're essentially in a hyperventilating state. When you're in anxiety, you're in a hyperventilating state. So your breath is very short. That 4-4 ratio helps balance it out. If you're trying to slow the system down to really go into that restful state, in for 4, out for 8. So, if you can't do in for 4 and out for 8, go in for 2 and out for 4 until you can boot that up. But it's basically increasing the exhalation, increasing the release of carbon dioxide. People think that oxygen is the only thing that's important in our breathing, but carbon dioxide actually enables the oxygen to release into our system. So it's a very important thing. Looking at things that the individual already does naturally, instinctively, unaware of, that you can tune into, hone into, and extend on that. There's usually something, but again, it comes back to my point at the beginning where I said why I took you through a guided practice. It's no good me giving you an omelette recipe for you to make with the autistic person, or teach your autistic person to make, if you're not really familiar with omelets, making omelets yourself. It's really quite important that you have a feel and a sense of breathing practices, guided practices, meditation practices, like I took you through, the principles, and when you use them yourself, you'll not only make changes in your own life, but it will make your mind more open to how you can work with an individual with these. Other principles are around trust. And trust, how we understand trust in our society, is more of an intellectual process. And that's not the trust that we're talking about. This trust is about intuition and learning to be connected to our intuition. We're too much in our left brain, which is very, very reductionistic, very needs facts. And it's often associated about being part of the autism spectrum, but actually as individuals on the autism spectrum who are very right-brained, not very left-brained. But because there is that tendency to really want things to be very certain and predictable and black and white, and that is very left-brain process. And the left-brain process takes us out of our right brain process. It pulls us out of our intuition. So our intuition is just this knowing that something's right for you or not right for you, or a little voice. Some people might often say, I just got a little voice in my head that said something, and that's something that in our society we've been taught to dismiss, because we can't prove it, and it might be just a silly thing. But actually this is part of our right brain's process. And we've become really disconnected. And I don't just mean autistic people, I mean our society as a whole has become really disconnected in our right and left brain balance. And that's not a new thing. That's occurred throughout decades, over centuries, quite strongly, really, since the scientific revolution. And and how processes have become a very reductionistic process. We have a reductionistic process in everything that we do in life, and that has moved us more and more into our left brain and further away from our right brain. So trust, as in the philosophy or the attitudinal qualities, is about learning to trust in yourself, and connecting with that. And the more you do guided practices, the more you start to come into tune with that. Acceptance, I find acceptance to be quite similar to patience, and learning to be okay with things unfolding in their own time and happening. So if something's actually part of some of those experiences that I've just described around the coffee pot and the train, acceptance comes into that. It's accepting that this is happening in this moment and it will pass. It's not here forever. It's just this moment. Acceptance that when your plans don't pan out the way that you want them to happen that day or for that week or whatever it is, coming back to this difficulty that is so synonymous for people on the autism spectrum, that routines being changed or plans being changed can create meltdowns. Acceptance has been a powerful part for me of learning to accept that this has happened. Of course, to accept, it's not just an intellectual thing, telling yourself you've got to accept this, Zaffy, because what happens in that moment, so a plan has been changed, something's been disrupted. In that moment, your fight, flight is triggered, your stress response is triggered, and then what you see is this explosion of anxiety and maybe explosion of some kind of behaviour that people around us find unacceptable. So for me, mindfulness is what's taught me is being aware that fight flight's been triggered, that plan's been changed, that situation's changed, that's triggered my fight flight. Instead of actually lashing out at this situation, actually, what do I do to try and stabilize my nervous system here? And for me, I immediately go into these practices, a breathing practice and these guided practices. And I can quite easily lead myself through these practices now because I do it every day. But I also have guided ones on my phone, on my iPhone, on my computer, and regularly listen to guided ones because sometimes I'm in such a heightened state that I can't guide myself through. So I need a guided one. I think, for that initial question that this person's been told that CBT mindfulness won't work. I can't say that that's absolutely correct because you're breathing, and breathing affects our nervous system and has a direct relation to our nervous system in calming it and creating it into a healthier state. I think the thing is that, like I said before, mindfulness is one small word. Well, it's quite a long word for a very vast thing. And again, science in this reductionistic process, left brain process, has tried to push mindfulness into a box so they can make it fit into our health system. And then that's when we get comments like something won't work for you. And I find that a little bit disempowering for whoever that was that's been told that, because that's going to close your mind off, or potentially close your mind off for possibly having a go. And I can see a hand up. And
there's somebody's raised the hand. I think it's Amy.
Is Amy? Sure, I wasn't sure.
Hi, yeah. I've led mindfulness practices in the past with kind of people who are typically not neurotypical. Within that, I've kind of used a lot of metaphor and imagery, which is sometimes not a strong point for autistic people.
Yeah.
What would you kind of say? Do you kind of edit that, or kind of focus more on body scan, sensation, that kind of aspect?
Again, I would say it's about knowing each individual of who you're leading. Maybe as a general, that yes, probably the body. That might be complicated if people, as I've said, of having proprioception issues, and may need pressure applied to them to experience things. Or, but if you know the individual, then you're going to be able to work with that. And then, of course, there's the other element of people find it absolutely too painful to experience things in their body. And that's when I would move to imagery. I think the trouble, you're absolutely right, using metaphor is a very complicated thing. But if I knew someone's fascination was with cars, then my imagery would be all around cars, and I would be quite confident they're going to be able to connect with that, and understanding what it is they like about cars. So If just because they like cars, it doesn't mean I'm going to go and start talking about cars rolling down the river, because those two things might not connect. But if that person likes cars and going to museums, and I know that they've been to a particular museum, I would start visualizing and talking about that museum, because I would guarantee that person's probably got a picture-by-picture memory of that museum. And, you know, what you're doing in that moment is that you're focusing the attention. And that's when you're focused your attention, and this is kind of the meditation element of it. Meditation is about single focusing. And in actual fact, autistic people are really good at singularly focusing, but we're also good at having our minds run off, just like every other human being's minds, especially when we're anxious. And then all those worrying thoughts go round and round and round. So actually being able to draw on something that's of the interest and take the attention there is actually going to help slow down when the mind's rushing, that acts as a trigger on our stress response. When our stress response is triggered, so maybe say I've had a coffee, maybe my mind's fine, I'm calm, I'm peaceful, I have a coffee, I don't drink coffee, but I've had a coffee accidentally because sometimes Starbucks messes up, and then boom, it's triggered my stress response. And then my mind's going da, 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 da. In that moment, I can't really do a lot about the physiology of the caffeine in my system, because the body's got to process it, metabolize it. But what I can do is draw my mind to a single point that helps stop it rushing, because that rushing, going on to lots of thoughts keeps re-triggering the stress response. Yeah, so finding the interest and working the imagery around the interest. I know one day I was leading a guided practice in a conference somewhere, and Wen Lawson, I do a lot of speaking with Wen Lawson, who I'm sure you're familiar with, and afterwards in the car we're driving, we're talking about it, and he just said, no, it didn't work for me. When I thought about it, the imagery was not something, if I know now, if I was to guide Wen through a practice and talk about birds, he'd probably totally be there, because, Wen knows everything about birds. And, traveling with Wen, we nearly end up crashed and side-wrecked because he wants to stop for every bird. So yeah, that's yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No worries. And people struggling with sensation, maybe weighted blankets of things on the body might also help. Yeah. Yeah. Is there any more questions before my mind flicks on to something else to talk about? No.
There is only 5 more minutes, Zaffy, as well.
Okay. Okay, so what else can I share about mindfulness? I think that we're caught up again. We're caught up in our because of the society that we live in, and the way orthodox medicine thinks is we look for quick fixes. And so we might start on something in the mindfulness process, and it's not a quick fix, but it's a slow fix, but it has a more long-term fix. And so I'm going to give you an example of that from a very recent experience. So I've already shared that I've had 2 full breakdowns in my life, and one of them was just very recently. The first time I went through a breakdown, I did initially go on to medication, and the medication was helpful in that moment, but the body adapted to the medication very quickly. So more medication needed to be added, and then the medications have the toxins in the body, so they create other problems. I was fortunate that I was working alongside holistic therapy. So I was using homeopathy and herbal remedies. And that was actually when I started into my meditation. So this was in 2009. So I eventually moved off the medication and I stayed with all the holistic energy practices. And, you know, I got back up on my feet, and I didn't just get back on my feet. I ended up being able to come across to the UK. And, you know, you couldn't get me in an elevator, never alone an aeroplane, but I was able to manage to get myself here. And I recently went through the same thing, and I didn't use any medication whatsoever. I've solely just used homeopathy, herbal tinctures again, acupuncture, meditation, and body energy work. You might know it as Reiki. And in my process of learning these over the decades is that I've become in tune with my own ability to use energy to help myself, which again is a long conversation. And again, this took quite a lot of months, and it was very challenging. And at some point, was unsure if I was actually going to make it through. But I come through, and I come through stronger. I don't just come through stronger with some more wisdom about things. My body comes through stronger. And I don't want to discourage people away from medication. That's not what I'm saying here. But our full reliance on medication isn't the answer. And I'm sure that you either, maybe some of you in the audience experience this, or you're working with people who are on lots of medications, and more medications get added on because that one either stops working or it creates a side effect that they then put another medication in. There needs to be a balance in our society between medication and really appreciating, respecting holistic principles. Because, you know, learning to understand this element of our body is what true health is about. And actually, I fully believe if I hadn't have learned this, I wouldn't be alive now, because the experience was so excruciating. I remember rolling around on the floor, begging to be put down because it was so uncomfortable. And this last experience that I experienced, I think because I'd had the experience before, I knew it was possible to come through. I have a homeopath who was in contact with me every day and could change my remedy at the moment with what I needed. And most importantly, I had an incredibly amazing supportive partner who actually lost her job because I needed 24-hour care and she couldn't go to work. And, you know, these are just things that we don't necessarily get to learn in the orthodox medicine process. So I really am a huge advocate of homeopathy and herbalism and all sorts of things holistic. And I'm happy to, if people want to email me to ask me more questions about that, I'm more than happy to share what I know. So I realise it's 4 o'clock and that you've probably all got other things to get to after this, so I'll stop monologuing.
Thanks, Zaffy. That was really helpful. I do mindfulness myself, but it's really good to hear how you practice it and how you've encouraged people. So thank you very much. I don't know if there is anybody who's got any questions. I'll stop recording now, and then if somebody